I'm Carol Knapp. I'm one of the members of the committee. Chats is sponsored by the community bank with headquarters here in Damerscott and has 16 branches along the coast of Maine. We're very grateful for them, their sponsorship. Our speaker today is Steve Morris, General Manager of Gamage Shipyard in South Bristol. Steve was born in Philadelphia and educated at Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois. He has a bachelor's degree in graphic and applied arts. He spent the majority of his career with the R.R. Donnelly and Sons Company, serving in several capacities, including sales vice president of European operations. Subsequently, he founded and owned Coolidge Communications, a graphics production company in Waltham, Massachusetts. He sold Coolidge Communications in 2002, prior to moving to Maine and settling in Nobleboro with his wife Beth, who happens to be here too. He joined the Gamage Shipyard at that time. The Gamage Shipyard has made an amazing transformation in the years since Steve has been in charge. In fact, recently Down East Magazine selected the shipyard as the best marina in Maine. Steve's interests include golf, skiing, and of course, boats. So let us
Carol, thank you very much. I appreciate the kind introduction, and it's so nice to see so many people turning out on a weekday. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully present some information that you all find interesting. Because of talking about a shipyard that has such a long career, it makes sense to break it up into some individual sections. So what I thought I'd do, which you probably have read for the last 10 minutes, talk about a brief history of the yard, kind of a timeline. Talk about the facilities through the year, how they have changed. Talk about some of the boats, the types of boats and the boats themselves that were built at the yard, and then the shipyard today. So if we go back a couple of hundred years to the 1800s, two brothers owned most of the land that the shipyard is on now. In fact, they had a tract of over 100 acres in South Bristol. And these two brothers were involved in farming, fishing from that land, and they were doing some quarrying on the land. I know there's a lot of ledge up there. So, but they were not interested and were not involved in shipbuilding. The property sits down, I expect you all know South Bristol, but sits down on the gut in South Bristol, close to the mouth of the Damerscott. It's a terrific piece of property and deep water frontage. It's on a protected cove, and it's ideal for shipbuilding. But shipbuilding didn't start until the 1870s, after the Civil War and the Reconstruction period. Two other Gamages acquired the land, and these were Albion and Menzies Gamage, and they started a shipyard in 1871. They built schooners, they built fishing boats, and they built steamboats in the 40 years that they owned the yard. These folks started the boatyard in a period of economic recovery and a period of time when Americans were discovering how to take vacations, and families would come to Christmas Cove starting about that period. They needed support, they needed services, they needed a way to get there. There were no roads down the peninsula, and A&M Gamage figured in all of those efforts. They built schooners that moved produce up and down the coast. They built fishing boats that provided fish to the area. They also participated in the pogie speculation in the late 70s. Pogies are a type of menhaden, and they came inshore in terrific numbers. And the Gamages were building boats and fishing and bringing in huge amounts of these pogies, and they were rendered down for oil and for fish meal. And it was a very successful business. A lot of money was made in it. The Gamages did very well in it, I've read. But it ended as soon as as suddenly as it began. In 1877, the fish disappeared, and the fishery was done. We've seen cycles like this recently, and people get worried about them. The pogies are back, not in the same numbers, but these cycles continue. The steamboats they built 3 of them, really supported the Christmas Cove community. They went up and down the river from, they picked up passengers from the station in Nobleboro and took them down to the Christmas Cove area. And the next phase, the next owner of the yard was Elliott Gamage, who brought it from the brothers, and he really was more interested in supporting the steamboat business, the Damascotta Steamboat Company. Didn't build any boats or nothing of any consequence in the 15 years that he owned the company. But then in 1926, Harvey Gamage, probably the most famous of the Gamage family, bought the yard, built a shed, and started building boats. And over the 50 years that he was involved with the yard, he built somewhere upwards of 280 boats. In the early years, he built recreational sailboats primarily. We call these yachts. They were well fitted out, finely crafted vessels. He, during the war years and just before, built military vessels for both the Navy and the Army. And then after the war, he started building fishing boats. And that's probably where he was the most successful. He built over 150 of them, all the way up to almost 100 feet long. I will go into these in some detail, but this is where he really made his fortunes and helped a lot of fishermen make a lot of money through the years as well. And finally, you're probably most familiar, and he's most famous for the schooners he built, and we'll talk about those briefly as well. After Harvey Gamage came Linwood Gamage, his only son. Harvey died in 1975 or 6. Linwood took over the yard and was faced with some tough decisions right from the get-go. Wooden boat production was on the decline. People didn't want wooden boats anymore. In the fishing business, they wanted steel, tougher, cheaper, faster to build, and less expensive to maintain. Linwood endeavored to change the direction of the yard. For a while he built wood in one shed and steel boats in the other side of the shed. It didn't work. It's a different set of skills. It's different people that are required. A welder can't caulk a boat. A caulker wouldn't touch a welding torch. And it just didn't pan out. I think they built 8 steel boats. So Linwood then, having this prime piece of property, looked around to see what else he could do with it, and he decided to enter the recreational services business for the local boatmen. And he brought in a travel lift. He reconfigured some of the yard as far as his resources would allow, but it did not pan out. He was not of a temperament to deal with the public on a large scale, and the yard went into a period of decline. Rory Callan bought the yard from him in the year 2000, I believe, and rebuilt the business. Callan is a Massachusetts native, longtime resident of South Bristol in the summer, and he bought the yard for the right reasons. He wanted to see a boatyard continue on that site. We're no longer building boats. The last boat was built at the yard in 1981, but we do maintain and store and provide storage for around 150 boats total through the course of the season. When Callan bought the yard, and we'll go into a little bit more of this, he re-equipped it, and he built a number of new facilities that we'll look at. So that's the history. Now we'll take you through a few pictures of facilities. Here you see the yard in the 30s. This is when Harvey was in his heyday. He had the long building in the lower, in the center right, was the shipbuilding shed. Although most things were built outside, he had carpenter shops and machine shops inside this building. And in the portion that sticks out over the water, he had ways, so he could bring boats in and out of that building as well. But as you'll see in the foreground, there's a ship being constructed. Most boats were built outside. It was a pretty tough business. The yard looks to be in a bit of disarray in this photo compared to some others I've seen. So I suspect they're ramping up for the military war effort. There are a dozen cars in the parking lot. I've heard stories of the guys who drove down from Damerscott and Walterboro, and they put 2, 3, 4, 5 guys in a car and come down Route 129. And that looks to be this era when they were just ramping up for that business. In the mid-40s, after the war, he had built this large building that you see on the right. I've heard some stories about this building already this morning. And there were 2 building bays in this building. They had railways that went from inside the building, right outside. They built 150-foot boats inside this building. Occasionally they had to take a window out to fit a bowsprit in, but the building on the far left, it was what we call the tin shed. Harvey did all of this lofting for these boats upstairs in there. Downstairs was the paint shed and supplies. The buildings in the center were the carpentry shop and the offices. And then on the lower right, the fun-looking roof, that was the blacksmith shop or the foundry where they fashioned a lot of the steel and iron pieces that went on the boat. This again is in the mid-40s. Now, if we go to the late 40s, we see an aerial shot, and we see the yard really picked up and looking pretty good. Harvey at this time had his fishing boat building business well underway. You can see they now have a substantial wharf out in front of the yard, and they were well into the production of their fishing boats at this time. This shot I got from the Historical Society in South Bristol. They assure me that the people in the foreground were not employees of the yard. You can see that the yard was well maintained at this time and was quite productive, the number of boats they put through there. And here, a few years later, they've shortened the building with all the windows. That used to stick out over the water. I can't find out, or haven't been able to find out why they did that. But again, a tidy looking business. You can see a smaller boat up on the ways to the right of that building. And the wharf is out of sight on the left. Here you can see it, 20 years later, virtually no changes. They just had their heads down, were building boats in this period. But in this shot, you can see one of the new style boats, a schooner. This is the Bill of Rights that was built in 1971. So my surmise is it came out of the building, was brought alongside, and they stepped the mast and did the final fitting out before it was delivered. So that's the yard up through the 70s, and nothing happened in the yard as far as new buildings or facilities for the next 20 years. And in fact, that era was an era of really unfortunate decline. As I mentioned, Linwood, who was now in charge, built his last boat in 1981, a steel boat. He didn't make money on it. In fact, he lost quite a bit. The owner of the boat said, build me 2 more and I'll make it up to you. But Linwood didn't have an appetite for it. So he closed down the boat building business. He turned to the maintaining and repair and storing of recreational boats. He brought a travel lift in. So he made a pretty good effort to try and do this. But as I mentioned, his temperament wasn't one suited for customer service. And there's some chuckle. Some people know Linwood here. So this picture doesn't show much of the facility, but it shows the state of decline that we found the buildings in when Rory Cowan bought it, and when I came up to run it, you're looking through broken windows and the west side of the building right up through holes in the roof. It was in terrible shape. We didn't take it down until a year and a half ago, but we'll talk about that more. In 2000, a fellow from Massachusetts bought the yard. It literally was on the brink of bankruptcy, and apparently the bankruptcy proceedings were to start the day after Cowan closed on the business. The very first things that Rory did was to make a statement, an impression with some new facilities. The first thing he did was to build this dock house and a 20-foot slip marina, a new wharf, and start maintaining boats and providing slip storage for them. We'll talk about those in a bit as we get into them. But next I wanted to talk about some of the Gamage built boats. This is another shot of a builder's plaque that I got from the Historical Society. I have one of these plaques that was given to me. I couldn't find it, take a photo of it, so I used the Historical Society's photo. Every boat that Harvey built got one of these plaques. The Navy didn't want them in plain sight. They put one aboard and hid them, I'm told. But all of the yachts had something similar to this, and all the fishing boats had one of these, and even the steel boats had a version of this that represented Linwood's efforts. When you look at the boats, they come in 5 different general types, and they are really, they didn't cross over very much. The first 15 years of the yard, Harvey built yachts. And I never realized this. He didn't build much else. He built fine, large sailing boats, sailing vessels, up to probably 60 feet in length. During the war years, he obviously stopped the production of yachts. There wasn't much market for that. He went into building military vessels, government contracts, Navy ships and port vessels. After the war, he went to the fishing boats, built 150 of those, or more than that, more than 150. And he built those. Those were built at the yard from the end of the war right through the end of the building of the boats. Interspersed with the fishing boats were the schooners, and he built 6 of them. All of them are still going. All of them are absolutely majestic, and you see one and you see how big it is and what it takes to run it and maintain it, and it's just damn impressive when you get up close to one. Harvey and then Linwood also built 8 steel vessels at the end to try to transition into a new business, but as I said, it did not work out for them. Look at the recreational boats or the yachts. Harvey started out right from the beginning of 1926 building big boats, and it was really a surprise that somebody coming out of the box didn't build little boats, the medium-sized boats, but he built 40 and 50 footers. His first boat was over 40 feet. This was built, I think, the second year of full production. This is Kelpie. Kelpie is still out there sailing. It's 65-foot Alden design. John Alden was a prolific and highly competent designer. His offices were in Boston. He built thousands of his designs, literally have been built. But in the first 15 years, the first 80 yachts that Harvey built, 73 of them were to Alden's design. So the conclusion that I've drawn is that there must have been a very close relationship between John Alden and Harvey Gamage. I think mentoring and advising and keeping a close eye on what's happening, because these boats turned out to be very successful. I've seen some photographs of Kelpie, the boat on the screen, in my research. She is beautifully and ruggedly built, but it's not lavish in the terms of yachts today. It's very fine craftsmanship, but it's workmanlike. It's good sturdy doors and frames and planks and joinery work, but nothing over the top or fancy. this boat, as I think I mentioned, is still out on the West Coast, still in the charter trade, and still very much in demand. The next boat is another Alden boat. This one was built right at the beginning of the Depression, and handsome boat being fitted out here. She doesn't have her booms yet, but looks like it's in pretty complete shape. And this is one of the first boats that Harvey built when he realized that building more than one of something at the same time made sense. Production sped up because you could make two parts, complicated parts, at the same time, rather than having to figure out how to do it a second time. And he built three of these. And you can imagine 3 58-foot schooners right at the beginning of the Depression must have been a pretty daunting task. This is Penzance, and she and her two sister ships were sold, probably sold before they even laid the keel. But these were identical boats, and were very successful cruisers and racers through the years, all through the Depression and afterwards. Not everything that Harvey built in the yacht or recreational boat vein was Alden designed, and not everything was a sailboat. He did build some small powerboats, but he was not in the big motorboat business. This is a Cruzan, a 29-footer built just after the war. Probably a soldier that had been off, or a sailor that had been off and wanted a motorboat when he got back, and had Harvey built this for him. You can see this zipping around the gut. Interesting in some of these old photos is how different the boats are in the background, and they got dories and wherries, but no big shiny sailboat yet. The next photo is of the last sailboat, the last yacht that Harvey built. This is a Malabar 33. It was a class of boats, and in typical Harvey fashion, he built three of them together, right next to each other. This is the last one to come out of the shed, I am told, in 1950. And you see the shed doors are the large white panels on the building ashore. But these were so small that they only needed to open the lower half of the doors on one side to launch this. So that's pretty much the story about the recreational boats. During the end of the 30s and beginning of the 40s, Harvey started to get the message that things were going to change, and war was widely discussed, and the potential and what that would mean to American business what had to have been a constant concern for businessmen. Harvey was a good businessman. He realized that he couldn't continue to make sailboats during the war if war came and survive. So he did a number of things with the business, and the one that surprised me the most, and I'd never heard about it until I started researching this, was he brought in a partner. And the partner's name has escaped my memory, but he was a local fellow. He had connections in Washington, and he encouraged Harvey to go after, and he assisted Harvey in the bidding process for the military contracts. And these military contracts were for a totally different type of boat. One, of course, they were power boats. Two, they were very robustly built. The scantlings, as we call them, the dimensions of the frames and the beams and the timbers were all much heavier than a sailboat or a yacht would be, and it's understandable. These were going in harm's way, and they had to be able to take a hit and come home. And the other thing that was a big change for Harvey, I think, in his decision to go into the military vessel contract business was dealing with the government. Harvey had been his own man for 15 years. He didn't have to worry about the, he'd do a bill, he'd write up a bill for a customer, and it would be settled by a handshake. It wasn't paperwork, it wasn't accounting, it wasn't contracts, and these were all things Harvey recognized that he needed to understand, and this is part of what his partner brought to him. During the contracts, I guess, were for 5 vessels. I think I'm skipping a slide or two here. Were for 5 minesweepers that were built starting in 1940. 4 transport ships. Minesweepers, I think, were 97 feet long. The transports were 147. He built a number of harbor vessels that were smaller in the 70-foot range for the Army. I think he built 3 or 4 of those, and he built a number of smaller skiffs and launches as well. In this picture, in 1941, taken from one of the large buildings, probably out of an office window, you can see 2 boats being constructed outdoors. This photo was taken in June of 41. Pearl Harbor wasn't until December, so this is 5 months before the war. But these contracts were already in place, and they were building. And they were building in a hurry. They needed boats, and they needed a lot. The government, the Navy, needed ships, and a lot of them. Here you can see one boat on the right being framed, about half framed. The boat on the left has been finish framed. The inside ceiling or sheathing on the inside of the frame looks to have been completed on that one. And the deck is finished. And there are 8 guys scurrying around on the decks. And they built these things in about 8 months. So you needed a big crew, knew what they were doing, could work unsupervised, and get the job done. 3 months later, these 2 boats have both been completely planked. The superstructure on the boat on the left is about half finished. These were stick-built cabins. Much as you build a house, they were timbers, and they just put them up like 2x4s, bang nails, and get them finished. Fitting out the boats, by this time they had their engines in them and everything, but the fitting out the boats took almost as long as it took to build the original hull. That would be putting all the trim, the wiring, the plumbing, the engines, doing all the mechanical work, the tanks, all that would take another 3 months after the boats were ready to be launched. The next picture is of the same 2 boats, I think, from the ground. And here you see a rather disorganized work area. And I attribute this not to Harvey's habits or the habits of his workmen, but the pressure they were on to get these things finished. You look at the makeshift scaffolding around the boats and the ship's saw. I mean, that's a big piece of equipment in the foreground, that bark. And that's a huge bandsaw that they use for cutting frames and ribs. It's just sitting out there in the weather. I mean, this isn't the way you take care of tools, but this is just some of the things they resorted to get these boats built quickly. I counted 8 OSHA violations in these 2 ships, and I'm sure if an OSHA inspector showed up, he'd probably just close them down rather than count one. They didn't have to worry about that in those days. In this photo, again, the same 2 boats in a sequence. The boat closest to us, I believe, has now been launched, and this is the completion, or moving to completion, of the second boat. It's in primer. It still has to be painted. It still has all the exterior metal work, and the engine's probably still to be set up and tested. But here's what these minesweepers look like. And I think the date is wrong on this one. I think this was actually in January of 42. But here they are afloat, one of them afloat, and ready for sea trials. And I guess you all know what a minesweeper is. They were sent into harbors to clear it of mines or to lay mines. So they had their dual purpose.
Important, they were made out of wood.
They're made out of wood. Magnetic mines came into use during the Second World War. The magnetic mines would sense the steel hull moving by and explode, and it was a proximity explosion that would end plates and sink boats. So these were what they used to handle those. And Gamage built them, built the 5 of them, as I've said. Rice and the other folks across the river, not Washburn Dowdy, the older company that was over there, they all had contracts for these same boats, so there was a lot of comparing of notes. But these were built up and down the coast. And when you need 100 or 200 minesweepers in a hurry, where do you go? The government realized that you go to a lot of small boat builders that had good basic skills and bring them on board. And that's what happened to this. I don't have pictures of the patrol craft or the transports, but this will give you an idea of what they were doing for the military. After the war, it was obvious that there were no more ships to build. In fact, there was a surplus of them. And Harvey looked around, and I'm sure he had seen this coming, while they're still building the minesweepers. What am I going to do next? And he turned fishing boats. A lot of the yards, the Nibbins and the Rice and some of the others in Maine and elsewhere looked at the recreational market, returned to recreational boat building yachts. But Harvey saw it differently. He went after the fishing industry with a vengeance, and he built boats using the same skills that he had acquired building the military ships. And he built a hugely rugged, tough, seafaring fishing boats. He capitalized on all that knowledge that he picked up from the building of the military contracts, and these boats were profitable for Harvey and profitable for their owners as well. They were long-lasting, they were tough. They'd go out again and again in bad weather and bring their owners home. A number of his customers actually had multiple boats built by Harvey. The O'Hara yard, I think he built 6 boats for those folks. They're over in, or what's left of that organization is in Massachusetts and in Rockland. The Journey's End is part of the O'Hara family. Loyal customers, and Harvey did a good job. He was good with dealing with these folks. Again, you know, they had to move away from the handshake more towards a formalized accounting of what was done. But these were very successful boats. They made money for both owner and builder. The total number of fishing boats is somewhere in excess of 150 boats. Starting in 1944, he built boats, a dozen or more most years. This is one of the first, the Wild Duck. Harvey, again with an eye towards productivity, built this inside that big shed that we finally took down a few years ago. Built it building inside and not out on the bank, increased productivity. The guys could work full speed ahead, rain or shine, wind or snow, didn't slow them down. And the quality improved, the productivity improved, and Harvey benefited from that, as did the fishermen who took these boats to sea. Here is a small Eastern style dragger built in '48. Eastern style is, at the time there were 2 different styles of boats. Eastern style, they fished over the side. You can see the large mast and gaff that's positioned on it, and this pulled the nets back aboard the boat as they were fishing. The Western style draggers dragged off the stern of the boat. Eastern style draggers were very, very popular. The fleets in Gloucester and Bedford, Portland were filled with them. In fact, during the years of the production of these boats, the 50s and the 60s, when he was at his peak, half the fleets in New Bedford and Gloucester were these Eastern style draggers built by Harvey Gamage. It was really prolific, and it was a good time in the yard. This is the Monte Carlo, a little bit bigger. I think this is, what, 65 feet. This one has a second mast on it. Some of them had, depending on the rig and how they fished them, 2 masts. This one, the second mast is for radio gear. This was a well-fitted out boat. A lot of these boats at that time still didn't have radios. That was the problem. They were in trouble. An interesting photo, again, a few years further on, 1954, 3 boats at the wharf. The outer 2 boats on the left, the Pocahontas and the Wallanock, were new builds. They were built that year and launched that spring. I assume they're still being fitted out. The boat in the foreground on the right is the Eagle, and the Eagle was apparently in for repairs or refit of some sort. You can see the fishing nets are hanging up above. Don't know more about that boat, but there's a funny story about the Pocahontas. When they launched her, she came out of the shed in her cradle, down the ways, and if you're familiar with how this is done, they're built right on the ways. They couldn't move these things inside the boat. They built them. The ways were slanted too, so that when they lifted up the cradle just a little bit, she'd take off and go down into the water. They knocked the blocking out, and off she'd go. Well, the Pocahontas got away from them and was launched. It broke the tethers. She was going down the ways and went all the way across the gut, which is the small harbor, hit the ledge on the other side, did a fair amount of damage, and she had to be hauled out and repaired. It was a bit of an embarrassment for Harvey, but Harvey had shares in both the Wawanock and the Pocahontas. They would put syndicates of owners together for these boats sometimes. And he had shares in them, and it's reported that he made a lot more money owning these boats as fishing boats than he did when he built them. So Harvey was a good businessman, and this was his thing. He made a lot of money in this business. You'd think, you know, here's a little backward builder, but he was a successful.
Steve?
Next, we'll just brief talk about the schooners. The yard built 6 schooners in a period of 15 years. The first was for Havilah Hawkins, and he was a famous skipper. His son's still at it. He was sailing old and really decrepit schooners and trying to take passengers on them. And he finally decided, I've got to have a new boat. So he designed a boat which was designed to take passengers for an afternoon or a couple of nights or even a week. And she had some staterooms. It was not lavish. This was still workmanlike construction, but he had this built. He brought his plans to Harvey, and they figured they could build it for a price, which they did. And the Mary Bay is still out there going today. It's 80 feet on deck and the bowsprit. All these are on deck dimensions. The bowsprit of that probably stuck out another 20 feet. So these were big boats, 100 feet overall. The Shenandoah was built for Bob Douglas down in Martha's Vineyard. Douglas, better known as the owner of the Black Dog, the restaurant, the clothing company, really sort of a legend down in those waters. And he had the Shenandoah. He came to Harvey and had it built. And that is still going. That's anchored in the harbor, and she's a big boat. She was over 150 feet overall with the bowsplits. The Clearwater is actually not a schooner, but it was built very much in the vein of the schooners. It just has one mast, not two. She was a Hudson River sloop design, very traditional. Pete Seeger moved from his political activism to environmental activism, and he saw what the Hudson had become and wanted to clean it up. And he felt that building something, a Hudson River sloop, would represent the environmental effort. And he was really the first greenie among us, I guess. And he came to Harvey and had this 80-foot boat built. And she sailed down the road, down the coast with Pete Seeger singing and playing and raising money. And it's been a very successful league for the Hudson River cleanup. And she's still going. And still, they're still performing concerts. I think Pete Seeger's still alive and he's still involved. The next 2 boats, the Bill of Rights, we saw that in a picture at the wharf, and the Harvey Gamage were near sister ships. They were built in 71 and 73, and big boats. The Harvey Gamage was not owned or named by Harvey. It was named in his honor by the owners. The name still on the transom. The Harvey Gamage is owned by Ocean Classroom. It does educational expeditions, young school kids, college kids, and adults. If you're interested, I think the organization is now based here in downtown. And the final schooner, is the Appledore 2. And I have some photos of her under construction. This is built in that big green shed, and they were still building in there in 1977. You can see the frames, same construction technique that we saw in the fishing boats and we saw in the military boats, very heavy. You can see one of the frames on the floors, that's the third piece, very heavy and very stoutly built. The keel is on the floor, and these are raised and set into the rabbet on the keel. And then you see the props holding them up as they put all the frames in place, and then they start to join the frames together. And then they plank the boat and put the interior in. But the next picture you see, this is looking from the stern forward. You can see the planking has been done, the deck has been put on. Much of the interior is, the bulkheads are in place, and they're fitting things out. What I found interesting about this picture is the number of extension cords that are on the deck. Now, I'm sure some of that was lighting, but I'm also certain that they moved to power hand tools, in a way that they never had before. So, speed up production. You know, a good big half-inch drill or three-quarter-inch drill is a wonder when you're trying to get stuff done. So, the next picture is the apple door coming out of the shed in 1978. Launched stern first, as all these boats were. And you can see the cradles, the supports underneath of it, all attached together. And then as the boat floated, the cradle would rise up off and float away, and the yard is always running after them. But there was a fair amount of debris associated with the launching of one of these vessels.
Pretty boat.
Yeah, very pretty boat. Here she is under sail a couple of years later. One of my favorites.
Steve?
Yeah.
What do these things cost? I mean,
Well, remember that these were $1962, $1978, so it was very different from today. I've seen numbers of $500,000 for these,
Wow.
which is a lot of money then. And, you know, what would that translate to today? $10 million? I don't know. Wish I had it.
10 times.
Yeah, yeah. The next section, the final section, is talk a little bit about the boatyard today. I talked about how Roy Cowan bought the yard. It was on the really on the brink of cratering completely, closing down. He bought it so it could continue as a boatyard. He bought it and made a statement right away by building this handsome dock house on the new wharf and building the marina. The marina had 28 slips. It took 2 years to fill them, but we now have 28 loyal customers in those slips. I see at least one of them here today. And whose boat is, yes, in the picture, Dennis Hill. But these are Bellingham docks. They're the best out there. And, you know, the wooden floats that you see in some yards take a lot of abuse and don't stand up. These are 12 years old now and in great shape. All the docks have electrical power. We have water. We have a fuel dock where we sell gasoline and diesel fuel. So it's quite a completely comprehensive little environment down there that is quite popular with our customers. The next photo shows you the first building other than the dock office that Rory built. This was in 2005. This is a 6,500 square foot heated storage and repair maintenance building. Everybody asks me when they see it, it's about 43 feet high, I think. They say, why is it so big? Well, we take boats in there on the travel lift, and we'll look at that in a minute, but that's 25 feet high. That's what the machine that lifts the boats out with water and slings, and we can drive it right into this building. Here are a winter storage shop, and these are 40-foot boats that are undercover in there. We're working on them with the plastic removed. These are all power boats, but we also have sailboats in there. And we are now able to, we were sold out in this building. It was full, so we had a very difficult time bringing boats in to work on them in the winter. But we've addressed that, and I'll talk about that a couple of slides later. We have a boat in this building right now that's 55 feet, 54 feet, and she barely cleared, we brought her in the travel lift, and she barely cleared the center door underneath of it. So there was good reason why Rory built it that high. The rebuilding of the yard continued last year. We finally had the permits in place, the plans for our business identified, and another piece of property we had acquired, and that allowed us to address this issue. The old building had become really dilapidated and in need of removal. In this picture, we started in February. February morning at 9 o'clock, and by 11:30, 2.5 hours later, it was a pile of rubble. We took all the metal out of the rubble and used that, recycled that. We took the wood and was trucked down to Biddeford, I think it was Biddeford, where they had that electrical generating plant, so that was all burned, create steam to make electricity. The cement foundations, we ground that up. That is now, we resurfaced the yard. That's the fill that we use to level the yard out underneath this building and the buildings next to it. So we have a nice, clean, level surface in the yard now.
Is the boat that was in the shed part of that pile?
Yes, yes, it is. We took the engine and the fuel tanks out of it. The guys operating these excavators were really skilled.
Yeah.
And I watched them, they reached in through the open door as we were tearing down the building, and the boat was inside underneath that blue tarp, and they